Some mornings begin with peace, but end in eternal darkness. Do you believe that a person can disappear into thin air within only a few seconds? This haunting question lies at the center of the disappearance of Summer Wells, a 5-year-old girl from Tennessee whose vanishing in 2021 became one of America's most troubling unsolved mysteries. The disappearance of Summer Wells quickly became one of the most closely followed missing child cases in the United States. Despite extensive search efforts, despite hundreds of volunteers and investigators working tirelessly, one question remains unanswered. Where did Summer go? Was the person responsible a stranger hidden in the shadows? Or was the answer concealed within the people closest to her? This is not simply the story of a missing child. It is a journey into the gaps of memory, the uncertainty of incomplete evidence, and the hidden complexities of human behavior. Cold cases do more than challenge investigators to uncover facts. They challenge our understanding of trust, safety, and the fragile nature of everyday life. Before we examine this case more closely, it is important to remember that every detail must be approached carefully. A statement, an emotional reaction, or unusual behavior is not automatically evidence of wrongdoing. In criminal investigations, truth is built upon verified facts, not assumptions. If you enjoy true crime analysis and behavioral psychology, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and leave your thoughts about this case. Imagine a rural community where winding roads connect homes surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests. Hawkins County, Tennessee was a place like that. It was a community where neighbors often knew one another, where life moved at a slower pace, and where summer days usually passed peacefully. That peaceful setting is exactly what makes Summer's disappearance so disturbing. The tragedy did not occur in a place that appeared dangerous or chaotic. It happened in an environment where a child should have felt safe, surrounded by familiar faces and close to home. On June 15, 2021, the day began like countless others. Sunlight covered the hills, daily routines continued, and nobody knew that within a few hours, a desperate search would begin. The home on Ben Hill Road, where Summer was last known to be, would soon become the center of a mystery that remains unsolved years later. What makes this case especially haunting is not what people saw, but what nobody saw. There is no confirmed recording showing the exact moment Summer disappeared. No witness has ever provided a definitive account of what happened. There is only a gap in time between the moment a child was present and the moment everyone realized she was gone. Summer Wells was not merely a name in an investigation file. She was a 5-year-old girl with her own personality, memories, and small moments of happiness. Family members described her as energetic, playful, and full of the natural curiosity that defines childhood. Photographs of Summer show a little girl with blonde hair and a bright smile. Those images remind us that behind every missing child case is not simply a headline or a case number, but a real human being with emotions, relationships, and people who care deeply about them. When examining a case like this, it is essential to remember the victim before considering possible suspects. Summer was not simply a missing child. She was a daughter, a sister, and a young girl whose life was filled with meaningful everyday moments. Her story deserves to be remembered for who she was, not only for the mystery surrounding her disappearance. The disappearance of Summer Wells also raises important questions in criminal psychology. When something frightening happens within a familiar environment, where do people naturally search for answers? Many people instinctively believe danger comes from outside sources. Yet investigators must examine every possibility without bias. The key individuals connected to this case included Summer's parents, Dawn Wells and Candace Bly Wells, along with relatives, neighbors, witnesses, search personnel, and law enforcement officers. Following Summer's disappearance, every statement, action, and emotional response became the subject of intense public scrutiny. The pressure surrounding a major investigation does not come solely from the search for evidence. It also comes from public attention. Families experiencing a crisis often react in different ways. Some become quiet, some actively seek support, and others express emotions in ways outsiders may not understand. Behavioral psychology teaches us that outward appearances do not always reveal internal reality. A person who appears calm may be experiencing profound distress, while someone who displays strong emotions may simply be struggling to process an overwhelming situation. This is why investigators must distinguish observation from conclusion. In criminal investigations, the distinction between suspicion and evidence is crucial. An unusual detail may raise important questions, but it cannot become an answer without supporting proof. The Summer Wells case demonstrates how difficult it can be to balance the desire for answers with the responsibility to avoid premature judgment. The area where Summer lived reflected the characteristics of rural Tennessee: dense forests, challenging terrain, and homes separated by significant distances. These conditions created obstacles for observation, search efforts, and the reconstruction of events surrounding her disappearance. After Summer was reported missing, the local community responded immediately. Volunteers, search teams, and law enforcement officers worked together to search the surrounding area. June 15, 2021, appeared to be a normal summer day for the Wells family in Hawkins County, Tennessee. The afternoon carried the familiar rhythm of everyday life, with family activities, movement around the property, and nothing publicly known that suggested a tragedy was approaching. Summer Wells, a 5-year-old child, was simply living another ordinary day, unaware that within hours her disappearance would become a national mystery. According to the early accounts shared by the family, Summer returned home with her mother, Candace Bly, after spending part of the day away from the property. She had reportedly been involved in normal childhood activities, including spending time with family members. Like many children her age, Summer moved through her day with curiosity and energy, surrounded by people and places she recognized. Later that afternoon, Summer was reportedly in the basement area of the home with her brothers. The information provided during the initial investigation indicated that she was involved in planting flowers before she disappeared. This moment became one of the most important points in the timeline because it represented the last known period when Summer was seen before everyone realized she was missing. In missing child cases, the final known moments often become the foundation of the entire investigation. Detectives look closely at the last confirmed sighting, not because it always contains the answer, but because it defines the final known point in a child's timeline. Every movement, every location, and every person present can become an important piece of information. Investigators had to reconstruct the events of June 15th, step by step. They examined the timeline, the people who were nearby, communication records, statements, and the physical environment surrounding the home. The goal was not to create a simple explanation, but to determine what possibilities existed during the unknown period between the last confirmed sighting and the discovery that Summer was gone. The most difficult challenge was the lack of direct evidence showing what happened during that critical window. There was no surveillance footage capturing Summer leaving the property. There was no confirmed eyewitness account describing her movements after she was last seen. There was no single moment that clearly explained when the situation changed from ordinary to extraordinary. That missing information became the central mystery. Investigators were faced with a situation where a child had been present in a familiar location, and then suddenly she was no longer where her family expected her to be. The space between those two moments contained the questions that would define the entire case. The Wells property was located in a rural area surrounded by hills, trees, and uneven terrain. Unlike a neighborhood with open streets and constant visibility, the environment around the home created additional difficulties. Dense vegetation, limited sight lines, and multiple areas to search made it challenging to determine every possible movement. The landscape itself became part of the investigation. Search teams had to consider not only human behavior, but also the physical environment. Areas that looked small on a map could become difficult to navigate in reality. Investigators examined trails, wooded sections, roads, and nearby locations in an attempt to identify anything that could provide answers. When a child disappears, time becomes one of the most important factors. The first hours can determine whether evidence remains available or disappears. However, in Summer's case, the exact moment of disappearance was uncertain, making it difficult to immediately focus on one specific location or direction. After realizing Summer was missing, family members began searching around the property. In situations like this, the first reaction is often disbelief and hope. People naturally assume that a child may be nearby, perhaps hiding, exploring, or playing in an unexpected place. Those first moments are filled with searching and the belief that the situation may still have a simple explanation. As the search continued without finding Summer, the situation became increasingly serious. Law enforcement was contacted, and what began as a family effort quickly expanded into a large-scale missing child investigation. Authorities responded by organizing search operations and gathering information from everyone connected to the situation. The response involved local authorities, search teams, K-9 units, helicopters, drones, and hundreds of volunteers. Teams searched through wooded areas, roads, trails, and locations around the property. The effort became one of the largest searches in the region, reflecting the urgency of finding a missing 5-year-old child. Despite the enormous search effort, the following days brought uncertainty rather than answers. Each area searched without finding a clear sign of Summer increased the emotional weight of the investigation. For the family and the community, every passing day represented both hope and fear existing at the same time. As the case gained national attention, the public began closely examining every available detail. Statements from people connected to Summer, interviews, and information released through media reports became subjects of discussion across social platforms. The disappearance created intense public interest and many questions. Some differences in timelines or descriptions became topics of debate. However, investigators and behavioral experts have repeatedly emphasized that people experiencing stress and trauma may communicate in different ways. Memory can be affected by fear, confusion, exhaustion, and emotional pressure. From a psychological perspective, human reactions during a crisis are complex. Some people become highly emotional, while others may appear unusually calm. Some search constantly for answers, while others struggle to process what is happening. Emotional behavior alone cannot determine guilt or innocence. This is why investigators focus on evidence rather than assumptions. In the Summer Wells case, no individual has been legally found responsible for her disappearance. The investigation continues to examine every possibility, including the environment, access points, and timeline of events, while the central mystery remains how Summer disappeared from the last known location. The search expanded in many directions, but no confirmed breakthrough solved them. After Summer Wells was reported missing on June 15, 2021, authorities immediately began one of the largest search operations in the history of Hawkins County, Tennessee. Local law enforcement agencies, emergency responders, search teams, K-9 units, helicopter crews, drone operators, and hundreds of volunteers joined together with one goal: finding a 5-year-old child who had vanished from a familiar environment. The urgency of the situation was clear from the beginning. In missing child cases, the first hours are often considered the most critical because fresh information and physical evidence can disappear over time. Investigators moved quickly to search the surrounding property. Nearby roads, wooded areas, trails, and locations where Summer could potentially have traveled. However, the environment created significant obstacles. The area around Summer's home was not an open neighborhood with clear lines of sight. It was surrounded by hills, thick vegetation, uneven ground, and rural pathways. These natural features made it difficult to determine where a young child could have gone and created countless areas that required careful examination. Search teams faced the challenge of covering a large and complicated landscape. A small object, footprint, or personal item could easily be hidden by the terrain. Even areas that had already been searched sometimes required additional checks because changing conditions, weather, and visibility could affect what investigators were able to observe. During the early stages of the investigation, detectives worked with limited information. They needed to build a complete timeline from incomplete pieces. They collected statements, reviewed the sequence of events, examined the property, and tried to identify every person, movement, and possibility connected to the final known moments before Summer disappeared. Investigators focused on understanding the circumstances surrounding Summer's last confirmed sighting. They examined who had been near her, who had access to the area, what paths were available, and whether anything unusual had occurred. Each detail, no matter how small, had the potential to become part of a larger explanation. The investigation soon expanded beyond a local search. Additional agencies provided support, including specialized resources and experienced personnel. The case attracted attention beyond Tennessee, and the search for Summer became a national effort involving multiple organizations working together. Despite the growing number of resources, the investigation remained extremely challenging. More people searching and more technology available did not automatically create answers. The central problem remained the same. There was no confirmed evidence showing exactly what happened after Summer was last seen. The case received widespread media attention because it involved a young child disappearing from what appeared to be a familiar setting. Many people found the situation difficult to understand because the disappearance happened close to home, creating a fear that such an event could happen anywhere. Media coverage played an important role in spreading awareness. News reports helped keep Summer's story visible, encouraged people to provide information, and increased public attention. In missing child cases, public awareness can sometimes lead to important tips or new witnesses coming forward. However, intense attention also created new difficulties. Social media platforms became filled with discussions, theories, and speculation about what might have happened. Some questions were reasonable and focused on known facts, while others moved beyond the available evidence and created confusion. When a case receives massive public attention, people often attempt to solve the mystery themselves. The human mind naturally searches for patterns and explanations, especially when faced with uncertainty. But in criminal investigations, assumptions can become obstacles if they replace verified information. Summer's family experienced enormous public scrutiny during an already painful situation. Every statement, emotional reaction, and public appearance was examined by thousands of people. However, psychology shows that grief and trauma affect everyone differently, and outward behavior cannot always reveal what someone is truly experiencing. Some individuals respond to extreme stress by becoming emotional, while others become quiet or appear focused on practical actions. There is no single, correct way to react during a crisis. Investigators must consider behavior carefully, while still relying primarily on evidence and facts. During the investigation, authorities explored multiple possibilities. They considered scenarios involving people familiar with Summer, unknown individuals who may have been in the area, and accidental circumstances. This approach is standard in missing person cases because investigators must avoid ignoring any possibility before evidence eliminates it. From a criminal psychology perspective, investigators often examine opportunity, access, and familiarity with the environment. They ask important questions about who could have been present, who understood the area, and who had the ability to affect the timeline. These questions help create a behavioral framework without turning suspicion into a conclusion. Authorities also examined the broader circumstances surrounding Summer's life. They reviewed family background, relationships, routines, and living conditions to better understand the environment in which the disappearance occurred. Complex investigations often require separating important facts from unrelated information. Over time, the FBI and other agencies continued supporting efforts to locate Summer. Search operations, public appeals, witness interviews, and new analysis continued as investigators attempted to uncover information that could explain what happened. Yet the most important question remained unanswered. Where is Summer Wells? This question represents more than a missing person investigation. It reflects the pain of a family still waiting for answers and a community refusing to forget. Some cases remain unsolved, not because the search ends, but because crucial information remains missing. Summer's story reminds everyone that behind every case is a real child whose life matters. Years after Summer Wells disappeared, her case remains one of Tennessee's most heartbreaking unsolved mysteries. When a case remains without a final explanation, people naturally search for answers by examining every possible scenario. However, in criminal investigation, theories must always be controlled by evidence. A possibility may explain certain details, but without proof, it remains only a possibility. One major theory often discussed in missing child investigations is the possibility that the answer may involve someone within the victim's familiar circle. Investigators commonly examine family members, acquaintances, neighbors, and anyone who had access to the child or understood their daily routine. This approach does not automatically suggest guilt. Instead, it follows the basic principle of understanding opportunity and access. From a criminal psychology perspective, familiar environments create complex situations. People usually believe that danger comes from unknown places or strangers, but investigations often reveal that many possibilities must be considered. Familiarity can provide safety, but it can also create blind spots because people naturally trust those closest to them. When examining this theory, investigators focus on behavior, opportunity, timeline, and evidence rather than emotions or public opinions. They ask questions about who was present, who had knowledge of the environment, and whether any actions or information can be confirmed. The goal is to reconstruct reality, not to create a conclusion based on suspicion. However, it is essential to remember that no individual has been legally determined to be responsible for Summer Wells' disappearance. Suspicion, questions, or public discussion are not the same as evidence. A fair investigation must protect the search for truth by separating facts from assumptions. Another possibility considered is the involvement of an unknown person who may have appeared unexpectedly. In some missing child cases, investigators examine whether an outside individual had the opportunity to enter the area and create a situation that was difficult to detect. This possibility introduces a different type of challenge, because unknown events often leave fewer connections behind. If an outside person was involved, investigators would need to consider timing, access, and chance. The person would have needed to appear during a limited window, interact with the environment without being noticed, and leave little information behind. This is one reason stranger-related cases can become extremely difficult, because the connection between the victim and the unknown person may be almost invisible. The comparison between these theories creates one of the biggest questions surrounding the case. Was Summer's disappearance connected to something within her familiar world, or did an unexpected outside event occur at the wrong moment? The answer cannot come from intuition alone. Only verified evidence can reveal which direction is closer to the truth. Beyond possible suspects, another important aspect of the case is understanding the psychology of the victim. A 5-year-old child experiences the world differently from an adult. Children often trust their surroundings, rely on familiar faces, and may not recognize risks in the same way older individuals do. This natural innocence is one reason missing child cases are especially difficult to understand. A child's decisions are often based on curiosity, exploration, and a sense of safety. What appears unusual from an adult perspective may feel completely normal to a young child. Understanding this mindset is important when reconstructing the final moments. In investigations involving children, the first minutes and hours are extremely valuable. Detectives must establish timelines, identify locations, collect information, and preserve possible evidence. Every delay can make the investigation harder because memories change, conditions shift, and important details may become more difficult to verify. The silence surrounding cold cases does not always mean investigators failed or stopped searching. Sometimes the problem is that the available information is incomplete. Even with trained professionals, advanced technology, and extensive resources, a case can remain unsolved when there is no direct witness, clear recording, or physical evidence connecting the events. The Summer Wells investigation represents this difficult reality. Investigators were not simply looking for a missing child. They were trying to rebuild a story from fragments. They had to analyze timelines, statements, locations, and possibilities while searching for the missing piece that could connect everything together. From an Eastern philosophical perspective, many believe that every action leaves a mark, even if that mark is hidden for a long time. The idea of cause and consequence suggests that the truth may remain concealed temporarily, but events often leave traces that can eventually be discovered. From a Western psychological perspective, the case also reveals something uncomfortable about human nature. It reminds society that ordinary environments can sometimes contain unanswered questions. The feeling of safety depends heavily on trust, and when something unexpected happens, the trust can be deeply shaken. Yet beyond theories, investigations, and unanswered questions, the most important part of this case remains Summer herself. She was not merely a name in a missing person report or a mystery discussed by the public. She was a young child with her own personality, dreams, family connections, memories, and countless ordinary moments that made her life meaningful. Years have passed, but the search for answers continues. An unsolved case is not the same as a forgotten case. New technology, new information, or a previously overlooked detail can sometimes change the direction of an investigation that appeared impossible to solve. The story of Summer Wells leaves behind a question that continues to challenge everyone who follows the case. Can time reveal what the present cannot explain? History has shown that some mysteries remain silent for years before a single discovery changes everything. Until then, the search for truth continues. Although the final answer has not yet been revealed, Summer's memory continues to exist. Her case reminds